So when you say we want it to stick for everyone and we say all means all,
Yeah.
we have to dig a little deeper.
Hey there, it's Dr. William DeJean, and welcome to another episode of Unleashed Learning TV and Unleashed Learning Radio. Now, if you've ever struggled ensuring that your class, content, workshop, webinar, or the programs that you run makes an impact for everyone, or as we say, sticks for everyone, I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode. Dr. Delores Lindsay is here, and her message focuses on socially just educational practices, culturally proficient leadership practices, and diversity as an asset to be nurtured. She's co-authored numerous books, including Cultural Proficiency, a manual for school leaders, Culturally Proficient Coaching, and her latest, Leading While Female, a culturally proficient response for gender equity, which is out now. She's going to share with you specific actions you can take to help make sure learning sticks for everyone, and we do mean everyone. Let's get started. So, Delores, welcome to Unleashed Learning TV. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, William. How are you? It's great to be here. Thank you.
So happy to be here. So, Delores, like we were talking earlier, just before we started the episode, educators want to make learning stick for everyone. And our everyone is we've got learners from all different backgrounds and races and genders and sexual orientations and really, so everyone means everyone. And the reason I wanted to interview you is help us understand what everyone means and then how to reach everyone. So that we're excited you're here.
Well, we have a similar phrase with cultural proficiency work. We say all means all.
Fantastic.
And that works really well until people say, well, we mean all and we want everyone to learn. There was a phrase years ago, we believe that all students can learn. And then when you begin to question that a little bit, well, we mean everyone will accept students with special needs. You know, we just can't expect them all. And oh yeah, the students with behavior problems, you know, sometimes they just don't cooperate. And oh yeah, the students that don't speak English, you know, we just can't expect them. And oh yeah, they're the students who don't come to school all the time. And if they're not in class, we just can't reach them. So when people say all students learn, when you really begin to dig deeply, they don't hold expectations for all. So when you say we want it to stick for everyone and we say all means all,
Yeah.
we have to dig a little deeper. And cultural proficiency is a term that really means all. And it's a way to it's a focus on equity, inclusion, social justice, the terms diversity. You have to kind of take those apart and really begin to ask people, what are your values, beliefs, assumptions when you say all and when we focus on educating all students?
That's such a great way to begin because so often it's like me pointing a flashlight away because I'm trying to reach somebody. But actually what you're saying is first, we've got to push the flashlight ourselves to check on our beliefs, assumptions, and what we mean. And that brings me to the question is, and you started to do that, can you define what cultural proficiency, or give us a definition for cultural proficiency, please?
Well, cultural proficiency is actually it's what we call an inside out approach. First, we do our own work inside, and then we look at the work of the organization. But inside work means what are my values, beliefs, and assumptions about who learns, who teaches, and who learns. And then I have to look outside of the organization and what are the policies and the practices and procedures. And that's what we call the surface work. That's what's on the surface. But what's guiding those policies and practices? So we go below the surface again to find out what the values, beliefs, and assumptions are of organizations. And of course, William, you know that organizations are simply people organizing. So we can't say, well, it's the organization. No, it's the people organizing. So cultural proficiency focuses on who am I as an individual, and then who are we as an organization. And we have to be willing to examine and confront uh,
Mm,
when our behaviors don't align with our values. So we ask two questions: Are we who we? First of all, who are we?
yeah.
And that's the values question. We all have to be willing to say, who am I and who are we? And then we ask the question, are we who we say we are?
Wow.
So that's the inside out approach. And in a nutshell, that's what cultural proficiency is.
It's so terrific because a lot of the programs that we run to learn the system, we start with that examination. Like we start inward, outward. And that's a great way to think about for people who've worked with us, that kind of process. Which brings us to the next question. And what are some things, if we're committed to being a culturally proficient educator at a school, in an organization, whatever we do, what are some things we need to know about ourselves or be thinking about ourselves that helps do that?
Well, first of all, when we talk about culturally proficient educational practice, again, we have to examine self. And then the way we put it is, who am I in relation to those I serve?
Mm.
So not only do I need to know who I need to know this community I'm working with. So often in schools, educators drive in and drive out. So when it's like get inside, park, and then drive out in the afternoon. Um, our daughter serves a community, a rural community, a remote community in Alaska, and as teachers, they live in that village, and you cannot teach in that village unless you know that village and know that culture. Yet they're struggling to teach because some of the teachers, mostly white teachers, don't really know the culture, the native culture. And so you miss knowing who your students are if you don't know the community. So, again, culturally proficient practice is knowing what cultural proficiency is, it's knowing and doing. So, knowing what cultural proficiency is and then knowing what to do. And it's you can't just have one, uh, know the textbook or know the book. Oh, I know the four tools of cultural proficiency. So we just simply say, now that you know what you know, to what are you willing to commit? To what action are you willing to commit? So it's knowing and doing.
I love that. I really, really love that. Makes me think we always talk about who the learners are matters and then how we build that bridge, but we've got to know very specific things about who the communities that we're serving are. And then the work, that action is how we link it and how we make those connections so that learning can stick. We've got to know stuff about ourselves and them. So um, I'm thinking about your book now because I'm really excited about this book. And I'm going to make sure I ask the question correctly. So, in your book, Leading While Female, what you're talking about, you talk about gender leadership and cultural proficiency. And what it made me think about is to ask you, do we do cultural proficiency differently based on who we are? So, for example, does a white woman do it differently? Does a African American male? Does a gay person? Does it? So, does it? Does our? How do we do it differently based on the identities that we show up with?
Well, you just described cultural proficiency.
Yes.
Yes, we do it differently uh, because as a white woman, that's the only experience I know. I mean, I'm a Southern white woman. And so that is who I am. But I can learn about other people and I can learn who they are. And before I can teach someone else, I need to know about who they are. Before I can coach a teacher or a principal or a superintendent, I need to know about them. But as an individual, we are not only one perspective. So we are made up of our faith, our language, our ethnicity, our sexual orientation, our gender identity, our socioeconomics, and all that comes together in what we call intersectionality.
Mm.
And so I need to know that about myself, but I need to know that about you as well, and the person I'm teaching and the person I'm coaching. So this identity uh, is who I am, and it's how I do the work. But I also need to know that that's who everyone else is. So I can't label somebody else and just think that's who that person is. So a student with special needs is also male, female, gay, a child in poverty or a child of wealth. So that's the identity comes to us in so many different ways. As a white woman, I know that I have access to the system, and we talk about systems, and we're talking about a whole structure, institutionalized racism, if you want to call it. It is structured to serve the dominant culture really well, and it serves people within the system in varying degrees. So what we want to look at as a what I want to look at as a white woman, I want to constantly be aware of gender inequities. So I have to know what the inequities are before I can address them in an equitable way. So it's my responsibility as a white woman to confront those equities so that I can support other women in their growth. Now, I'm not speaking on their behalf,
Mm.
they have a voice. So it's not about me representing Indigenous women or women of color. It's or about Black women or Latinas. It's about me making sure there's a space so that they are there to make their own statements. They have a voice. I used to say, as a principal of a middle school, I would say, I'm here to represent those who cannot represent themselves. I have changed that.
Mm.
I've made a complete change. Um, that was that was wrong of me to say I'm representing other voices. My job is to make a space and place because I'm part of that dominant culture. I'm already in the room. So get the door open, get the chair there, and make that space because those women have a strong voice.
Yeah, it makes me think of what leadership is in those spaces. We interviewed Margaret Wheatley, and she talked about creating islands of sanity, and it makes me think of that discussion because you're saying you know who you are, and then you know what the work is based on who you are. That's what
Yeah,
I'm hearing you say, and
yeah,
it probably changes with the people that you're around to inform you what the work is.
absolutely. The book was written by women, for women, and men. We are very clear that our work is not about male bashing.
Mm.
The dominant culture still is white males. In the US, 75% of the superintendents across this nation are male. That's 25% are female, and 6% are women of color. We know we have work to do, and we cannot do this work without our male colleagues. So we rely on building networks, sponsorship, working together with our male colleagues through networks, mentoring and coaching, so that we're closing out those inequities. And again, it's for everyone
Everyone.
that we're talking about.
Terrific. Okay, so I want to ask you. You know, we were talking earlier. One of the keys in the system, in the Unleashed Learning system, is that key of inclusion. But it's also the classroom. It's the educators. Everything we're talking about here fits in that system. So, um, if there's an educator listening to you right now who's committed to all means all, and they're leaning into being culturally proficient or thinking about their own cultural proficiency. Can you tell us maybe in action what it would look like in action? I know that's a big question, but maybe just a little example.
Yeah, I can give you five, but
Okay,
I
fantastic.
may not have time for five. And the five are what we call the five essential elements.
Mm.
Um, Not to confuse everybody, but with numbers, but there are four tools the cultural proficiency is a framework.
Mm,
And uh, we know that out there, there's so many things right now. There's cultural relevance, there's restorative practice,
mm,
there's a lot of things focused on equity. Cultural proficiency is like a big umbrella or a solid foundation. Then all those things are examples of culturally proficient practice. So the five essential elements are five verbs for action. So, what do? You first assess who we are
mm,
and what do we already know. We know that we have data, more data than we've ever had, but COVID hit, and all of a sudden, no testing,
mm,
no test data to draw from. So, what do we need to know? Where else are we going to collect data? What will the data look like? It'll be different. So, we have to assess cultural knowledge and what is it that we need to know. Valuing diversity, we can say it all day long, but what does it look like? What are we doing to demonstrate our value for diversity? So these are action verbs. And then managing the dynamics of difference. This is what happens when there's conflict.
yeah.
And conflict is very natural and normal part of people coming together in organizations. So rather than be fearful of it, we confront it and we learn how to manage it. So when people are in conflict together, uh, uh, culturally proficient leaders know how to manage that conflict
Mm,
in a very productive way, and that people are treated with dignity and respect, and there's no winners or losers. People come out knowing how to work together, and then we know how to adapt to our changing environment. So how do we adapt? Again, no winners or losers, but we know how to uh, we know that our environments are change again, a very natural, normal part of people working together. And then we institutionalize what we're learning. We put it in our policies and practices, because if it's just a strategy here or a strategy
right,
there, it won't be around very long.
right.
So if we're going to use um, a particular practice, it's working really well, how does that become part of our policy? If we're going to change, if we're going to recruit for diversity, we better be looking at our hiring
Mm,
practices. We better be looking at who we're hiring and how are we hiring and what's happening. So that's how we institutionalize what it is we're doing. So everything we do comes under those five action verbs. And our research shows that no matter what it is you're trying to do, the action comes under those five essential elements. You should try it, because we've looked at almost every action that needs to happen. It'll be one of those five.
that's fantastic. So we're just about out of time, Dolores, but I want to ask you one last question, if I might. And so many educators right now, as you know, are online, or one day they're online, one day they're not, one day. So could you give us a example of cultural proficiency in an online setting?
Well, when we think about culturally proficient instruction, culturally proficient instruction in the classroom requires an inclusion. So engagement, inclusion, all learners working together. That's the same thing about online work. So we had to get smart quickly. So what does an effective strategy in person look like online? So when we say talk with your table group, well, we know that works in person. So what does a table group look like online? It looks like a breakout session. And it looks like having a strong dialogic question, a thinking question that requires people to get in that breakout room and have enough time to think together, really work hard on what that question requires of them to think in a reflective way. Journal writing is, again, is a way to let me think together, and then let me come together with my colleagues. So cultural proficiency is the inside out. Let me have time for myself. And there's also time for reading. Take this passage, take a few minutes, read what this says. It could be a paragraph. And now turn and talk. Who are you going to turn and talk to? Here's a pair. Have time to turn and talk to the person that's in California and the person that's in Australia. So here's your breakout room. Turn and talk. And how deep can you go with this conversation? So we're using the strategies that tend to work in the classroom, but how do they work online? And again, it's about assessing what is it we want students to know, and then how do we design an instructional strategy that gets to that outcome.
It reminds me, as we're finishing up, is that cultural proficiency really is saying, it says lots of stuff, but it's an inside out, because we talk about the delivery model, which is filling in, and then at Unleashed Learning, we talk about bringing out. And so the process of bringing out is I've got to know who the learners are that I'm helping to bring stuff out of, which is a much more respectful process and a much more inclusive process, because you got to know who they are to bring something out. And those processes online you're describing makes me think of that as well.
And giving people time to adjust to that online environment. Students that have not, the biggest piece that cultural proficiency provided for us when everyone moved to distance learning was another place for a gap to exist. The inequity of folks don't have access. And all of a sudden, now what do we do? I happen to be in, I'll just take a moment, short story, happened to be in a place of business, and it was just after COVID had started, and a teacher in a rather affluent school district said, I'm so excited I was able to call all but one of my students and let them know what their homework assignment is. So I turned to the teacher and I said, what about the one? And she said, I always have trouble with him. His parents are never home, and he probably wouldn't do the assignment anyway. And I turned to her and I said, what strategies might you use to reach out and contact him just in case? And she had no answer. She said, well, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. And so, of course, I just offer thinking questions. If somebody says I haven't thought about it, that means maybe they'll spend some time thinking about it. But I think that it exposed, just like No Child Left Behind did many years ago, it opened up something that we hadn't thought about before, because the inequity was there all the time. It just made it revealed to us in education what the parents knew all the time. We just now have found out about it.
It makes visible what maybe has been invisible for some of us for a long time.
Absolutely.
Well, Delores, I'm really thankful for the time. I think it's going to help people think about the ways to make learning stick for everyone and what everyone means. I know it's going to make me think about what we do and how we do it again and again and again. So thank you so much for the work you do. We'll look forward to keeping in contact.
And thank you, William, for the work that you continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thanks, Delores.
Thank you.
So now we want to hear from you. After our interview with Professor Delores Lindsay, we want to know, what do you do to support inclusion in your teaching, presenting, training, or professional learning? Now, as you know, some of the best conversations take place after the episode, so jump over there and join the conversation. And while you're there, if you haven't grabbed it already, grab your free ebook, 5 Essentials for Teaching, Presenting, or Running Professional Learning in a COVID, post-COVID world.